All right. Good afternoon, everyone. For those that I don't know, my name is Carrie Ann Platt. I'm Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs here at NDSU. On behalf of the Faculty Awards Committee, I would love to welcome y'all to our 65th Faculty Lectureship. What? Why are we? Okay. I'm already like, what's going on? I'm still excited to be welcoming you. This year, the awards committee has selected Dr. Adam Goldwyn as the recipient. It is one of the most prestigious honors we have here at NDSU, so we're very excited to hear him speak today. I also want to recognize a few individuals. Jessica Stryker, professor of mathematics. Jessica, are you here? I'm going to have you stand up. She was one of our finalists. Recognize her with a round of applause. An additional finalist, Dr. John Cox, professor of history, was not able to attend today, but we can give him a round of applause in his absence, in case he's able to hear us remotely or to view it upon recording. The faculty lectureship recognizes excellence in the three areas that we tend to associate with faculty work here at NDSU: teaching, research or creative activity, and service. And so in order to receive this recognition, you need to demonstrate excellence across all three, which is part of the reason we are so excited to be here today and to be hearing from Adam. Today's lecture is being recorded. We also have folks who are joining us remotely through Zoom. There will be an opportunity after the lecture is concluded to ask questions. Those who are here live in the room, I will walk the microphone around so you can ask your question. There will be an opportunity to submit questions through Zoom, and Julie will help me to read those out. So Adam has the chance to answer questions from all members of his audience. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Kimberly Wallen, who will do the formal introduction of Dr. Adam Goldwyn.
All right. Thank you, Carrie Ann. So, as she said, my name is Kimberly Wallen, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. It is my pleasure to introduce this year's Faculty Lectureship Award speaker, Dr. Adam Goldwyn. Dr. Goldwyn is a full professor who has been at NDSU since 2013. During this time, he has built an international reputation through an impressive record of research, teaching, service, and public engagement. He is the author of 4 peer-reviewed monographs and more than 30 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. His scholarship has taken him around the world through academic fellowships that he has won from Dumbarton Oaks, Harvard University, Uppsala University, and the University of Munster. He has taught in Poland and Greece and shared these global experiences with NDSU students through study abroad programs. He is deeply committed to bringing the humanities beyond the university. He has presented his work across our local community, including at Moorhead Public Library, Touchmark Retirement Center, and the Fargo North High School. His work has been recognized with the College of Arts and Sciences Outstanding Research Award and the student-nominated Vogel Teaching Award in English. His teaching continues to inspire curiosity, perhaps most visibly in his widely discussed course on Taylor Swift. Dr. Goldwyn's career reflects the best of a research university: rigorous scholarship, engaged teaching, international collaboration, and meaningful public outreach. Please join me in collaborating and welcoming him to deliver this year's faculty lectureship. Congratulations. Yep. Okay.
Thank you very much. How about now? Oh, now I hear myself. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Carrie Ann and Dean Wallen for the introductions, and also to the other members of the selection committee. I'm also very honored to have received this award with my fellow nominees, Professor Stryker and Professor Cox. I know Professor Cox isn't here today, but for those who don't know, he's one of the foremost translators of Serbian into English, and we share that interest in Eastern European history and translation. I don't know much about Dr. Stryker's work, but I did read that her most recent article is called Rotation Invariant Web Bases from Hourglass Playbook Graphs. So maybe we can get Dr. Cox to help translate that for us too. So my talk today is the result of ongoing research that began shortly after I came across a 2020 survey by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, the first ever national survey assessing millennial and Gen Z's knowledge of the Holocaust. We're back. So this 2020 survey included a list of states by the percentage of students who had, quote, definitely heard about the Holocaust, unquote. And as you can see, and what somewhat of a surprise to me, North Dakota tops the list, with Minnesota only 1 percentage point behind. At 84 and 83%, the survey would at first lead one to think that there is indeed widespread knowledge of the Holocaust. But digging through the data a bit deeper, I wondered what these young people meant when they said they had definitely heard of the Holocaust, because the data also shows that a majority can't identify some of the most basic facts about it. In North Dakota and Minnesota, where 83 and 84% have heard about the Holocaust, 58% and 53% did not know that at least 6 million Jews died. Moreover, 41% and 36% of North Dakotans and Minnesotans were unable to name a single concentration camp. So I sort of wondered to myself, what does it mean to say I've definitely heard about the Holocaust, but then also be unable to identify some basic facts about it, such as the number of Jews killed, and I would wager also would not know the number of other peoples also killed in the Holocaust, and the names of the places where the genocide was carried out. So the high percentage of students unable to name a concentration camp is particularly notable because 3 of the 4 most widely referenced works of Holocaust literature taught in US schools and around the world are set in Auschwitz. Elie Wiesel's Night, La Nuit in original French, Primo Levi's Se questo è un uomo, If This Is a Man, sometimes called Survival in Auschwitz in English. These are both survivor memoirs. Okay. And Art Spiegelman's Maus is a graphic memoir of young Artie's life in New York City with his father, interspersed with his parents' recollections as Auschwitz survivors. I'm not alone in thinking that there's a connection between Holocaust education, both in popular culture and how it is taught in schools, if it is taught at all, and the lack of awareness of Jewish death. More specifically, the Holocaust is taught as a genocide, yet the texts we read and the films we watch about it often are about survivors. Primo Levi himself noted this in his last work, The Drowned and the Saved, published in 1986, a year before he died by suicide. He recalled that, and I quote on the screen, "My religious friends told me that I had survived so that I could bear witness, and I did to the best of my abilities, nor could I have done otherwise. Despite having spent his life bearing witness, however, at the end of it, he came to see this work as ultimately haunted by a kind of insufficiency. Let me repeat that we, the survivors, are not the true witness." This is a troublesome notion that I became aware of gradually by reading other people's memoirs and rereading my own years later. So this is a startling statement from Primo Levi, the man who was, both during his lifetime and in the decades since, one of the most recognizable witnesses of the Jewish genocide. Paradoxically, moreover, Levi's reconsideration of the meaning of his life's work stems from the very fact of his having lived to speak of it. Survivors are not the true witnesses, he says. It is significant, too, that Levi came to this realization by reading survivor memoirs, the most influential form of witness literature about the Holocaust, and the one with which he himself is most closely identified. What Levi recognized in The Drowned and the Saved was that survival in Auschwitz was an atypical experience. He called the survivors an anomalous and negligible minority. And survivors of the camp were a minority of those who were incarcerated there. Levy, for instance, writes, and if this is a man, that among the 45 people in my car, only 4 saw their homes again, and ours was by far the most fortunate wagon. And we know now that 1.1 million of the 1.3 million people who entered Auschwitz never left, about 90% of whom were Jews, while the remaining 10% consisted of Polish civilians, Roma and Sinti minority groups, Soviet POWs, and LGBTQ plus people. Holocaust education has, in some ways, avoided this defining aspect of the Holocaust, that is, Jewish death. This is also true of the single most widely read work by a victim of the Holocaust worldwide, The Diary of Anne Frank. Unlike Levy, Wiesel, and Vladek Spiegelman, Anne Frank did, in fact, die in the Holocaust of typhus in the camp of Bergen-Belsen. But of course, you wouldn't know this reading her diary. When it abruptly breaks off, she would herself have no way of knowing that that would be her fate. So Levy and Wiesel spare us Jewish death by surviving. Anne Frank sort of does the opposite. She spares us Jewish death by by the writing breaking off before she knows that that will be her fate. So the question I sort of come to is, how can we expect students to know the name of concentration camps when the single most widely read book about the Holocaust, Anne Frank's diary, ends before the protagonist arrives in one? And how can we expect students to know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust when the most widely read texts about the concentration camps feature survivors? And here, just quickly, you can see some teaching materials from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, again, focusing on Knight and Anne Frank's diary. So again, foregrounding these kinds of texts. In 2021, Dara Horn convincingly argued in People Love Dead Jews that it is indeed the very fact of Anne Frank's diary ending before her deportation and death that has made her diary so successful. And here I quote, "An Anne Frank who lived might have told people about what she saw at Westerbork, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen, and people might not have liked what she had to say. And here's the most devastating fact of Frank's posthumous success, which leaves her real experience forever hidden. We know what she would have said because other people have said it, and we don't want to hear it." Horn argues that Frank's diary offers something profoundly necessary for the diary's overwhelmingly non-Jewish audience. The line most often quoted from Frank's diary are her famous words, "I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart." And you can find this printed on t-shirts for sale at the Anne Frank Museum and gift cards and on journals and all sorts of memorabilia. So Horn argues that these words make us feel forgiven for the lapses of our civilization that allow for piles of murdered girls. And if those words come from a murdered girl, well, then we must be absolved. And she concludes, that gift of grace and absolution from a murdered Jewish girl is what millions of people are so eager to find in Frank's hiding place. So for Horn, people do not read Anne Frank's diary to understand the Holocaust, but instead to avoid, in a way, understanding the Holocaust. That is, reading her diary, modern audiences never encounter the machinery of genocide that would ultimately murder her, her family, and 2/3 of the Jews of Europe. Instead, they find a story of uplift and resilience. So I think this is the broader cultural anxiety that surrounded Levi's claim that survivors are not the true witnesses. If the vast majority of the most widely read or watched stories about the Holocaust are about survivors, and again, here we can think about Schindler's List, the famous ending of Schindler's List, which actually shows the real Schindler's List survivors. Can we really be surprised when people don't know the scale of Jewish death in the Holocaust? So Levy suggests that survivor memoir is insufficient, and he laments that this insufficiency may never be overcome. Instead, survivors, quote, relate not only our own fate, but also the fate of others, the drowned. But this had been a third-party account, a tale of things observed closely but not experienced directly. What is missing from the archive of witness accounts of the Holocaust is narratives of death. Levy continues, no one has told the story of the demolition brought to its end, the finished work, just as no one has come back to tell us about his death. By the very nature of their survival, the very aspect of their experience which allows them to write a memoir, they can't do this. So in my book, Zero Generation, Holocaust Literature and the Art of Non-Survival, I tried to build upon and in some way disprove what Levy was saying. If survivor testimony was not the true witness, then we had to find the true witness. So my mission was to sort of find the one who had told the story of the demolition brought to its end, who had told the story of the finished work, the one who did come back to tell us about his death. So I tried to build upon and challenge this claim. And of course, though no one has ever literally come back to tell us about their death, we do in fact have texts written not just weeks and months before people died, but days, hours, even minutes. And these are the writers whom I call zero generation writers, writers who knew at the time of their death that they were not going to survive and whose knowledge of their own impending death informs their texts. These texts are different in important ways from survivor accounts. They form, I argue, a distinct archive of Holocaust literature, offering a perspective on the experience of death within the concentration-era universe not available through survivor testimony. Their perspective is exemplified by these two aspects in which they're written, that they didn't survive and that while they were writing, they knew they would not. And this distinguishes them from what are called first-generation writers, that is, survivor generation, like Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi. Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel and other survivors sort of had to grapple with what it meant to survive this event. And that's what their retrospective memoirs are about. Whereas these writers that I'm sort of focused on had to grapple with an opposite question: what does it mean to die? And what is it, and how do we sort of convey this knowledge to the future? So now I'd like to go into a little bit more detail about a few of the texts to show how they can reframe our understanding of the Holocaust. And I want to start by showing you the size of the Warsaw Ghetto, where about 460,000 Jewish people were locked inside. And just to give you a sense of it, if it were on Fargo, it would go from about Main Avenue to 12th Avenue North, and from about University Drive to the river. So that's the size of the area of the Warsaw Ghetto. And it had, as I said, 500,000 people. In summer 1942, the Germans initiated what they called Gross Action Warsaw, deporting 250,000 Jews to Treblinka, where they were murdered. In late 1942 and early 1943, the Jews, realizing their fate, decided to initiate an uprising in the camp. And between April 19th and May 16th, they managed to kill 17 German soldiers at the cost of 13,000 Jewish lives, most of whom were burned alive in their homes. The goal was not to survive, but rather, in the words of the last survivor of the uprising, Marek Edelman, not to let the Germans choose the time and place of our death. One of the leaders of this uprising was Yitzhak Katznelson. Katznelson was one of the most famous Jewish writers of his generation, a poet and playwright, and in the ghetto, he started underground schools in Yiddish and Hebrew for school children. In the Gross Action, his wife and two youngest children were deported to Majdanek. We know that they died soon afterward, but he didn't know that at the time that he was writing. And so he was tortured by this imperfect knowledge, alternating between accepting that they had died and sort of holding on to this impossible hope that they might still be alive. And that's when he decided to join this armed resistance movement. After the defeat, he was given a forged Honduran passport. And so he was not sent straight away to a concentration camp, but instead to the Vittel transit camp in southern France, where the Nazis held foreign nationals ostensibly to deport them back to their home country. But Katznelson knew that this was actually just a temporary reprieve. And he was, in fact, later deported to Auschwitz with his last surviving son, who you see there. So during those few months that he was in Vittel, he composed in Yiddish the Song of the Massacred Jewish People. And you can see his handwritten text over there on the bottom. And up top, you can see the suitcase handle. He rolled it up inside a suitcase handle, the text, and a friendly transit camp guard smuggled it out in the suitcase. So that's how this text survived. And so here's the opening. Sing, take your curved and light harp in hand and throw your fingers at its subtle strings. Heartsick, sorrowful, sing the last song of the last Jews on European earth. But how can I sing, even open my mouth, as I'm so very much alone? My wife and two children, what a horror, I'm shuddering, and I'm hearing weeping everywhere. This is a very different perspective than Elie Wiesel or Primo Levi, who grappled with survival, and Anne Frank, who didn't know the full extent of what she would face. Here, Katznelson considers the likelihood that he will be the last Jewish person on earth, and to sort of reconcile himself to what that means. So this poem is kind of his answer, and it oscillates between deep Jewish history, dispassionate witness, and highly personal verse lyrics. So for instance, here's another passage Horror and fear assail me, suffocating me. The railroad cars have already returned. That left only last evening, and now are back ready for another Umschlag. You will see with mouth agape in horror. They're still hungry. Nothing satisfies them. They're waiting for Jews. When will they be brought? Famished as if they hadn't already devoured Jews, but more, they're wanting more. Not just more. They're waiting to be served a humongous quantity of us. Here they're going down. Old folk, young kids, the youngest fresh grapes of an older life. Old Jews like vintage wine. The head of a dead man, right? So that's sort of, abstract verse. But here he provides some sort of actual witness. The head of a dead man shakes as if it were alive and could filter the living sweat of the dead man. A child begs his dead mother, water, a drop, water. With tiny fists beats her head. I'm thirsty, mama. Another kid's in the arms of his dead father. Yes, kids, even if we can prostrate, are resisting. The father, even if adult, can't do anything. The kid, not knowing, is imploring, Daddy, let's go from here. So here we have Katznelson making witness literature, recording what he saw. Still living children begging their dead parents for water, not realizing that they're dead. This is about as haunting an image as one could imagine, made all the more haunting because this is in fact what he imagined was happening to his own children, his wife and two children who had been deported, right? He's sort of imagining in his mind their last moments. And so interspersed with this sort of abstract part, here you can see his whole family. Everyone in this photo died in concentration camps. So interspersed with this are odes to his own wife, who is there, and there's him. I love to call you by name, pronouncing Hanale. To turn you now, they're taking you away with my people. You gift me your radiant eyes, your sad, gentle smile. I love calling you in sad loneliness. Remember? I love asking you to come, Hanale. Come here. Lean your sweet head of dark hair on my shoulder. Hold me in your arms, enliven me. Don't rest, or the eternal wound will be forgotten. Sit with me. I want you so much. Listen, love. Do you hear me? In my great tragedy, you make me happy. I fecundate you before the world. Carry the fruit of our accusation like a child in your lap. Remember the most cruel, horrible, inhuman thing on earth? I know you remember. I'll carry it with you to eternity. You and my sons will always remember the murder of our people, as will I. So here he is sort of addressing alternately the sort of ghost of his wife, but also sort of speaking to her as though she were still there. He completed this poem on January 18th, 1944, and he and his son Svi were deported on April 18th, and they died on May 1st in Auschwitz. So while the poem is not exactly a man coming back from the dead to tell us about his death, it was written in the last months of the poet's life, and after he knew he would already die, as he waited in the kind of purgatory that was the Vittel transit camp. It was smuggled out, and it reemerged after his death, thus giving us about as close as we might get to the tale of someone returning from the dead to tell us about what they've experienced. At the same time elsewhere in Europe, in Brussels, Belgium, the painter Felix Nussbaum completed his final painting, Triumph of Death, Skeletons Dancing, on April of 1944. And you can see down here, if you see there's an 18 there, this is a newspaper that shows us the completed date of the poem, of the painting. Before the war, Nussbaum had been a prominent painter studying in Berlin and Rome. In 1940, however, he was arrested as a Jewish person in occupied Belgium and sent to the Saint Cyprien transit camp in southeastern France. Of the 4,419 Belgian Jews rounded up on May 10th, over half were directly deported to Auschwitz, and most of the rest died subsequently. Nussbaum, however, escaped from Saint Cyprien, delaying his death in Auschwitz by 4 years in which he returned to Belgium and lived in hiding with his wife Felke. There, like Katznelson, he created a visual language of the Holocaust as it was happening, and in which, again, he thought the genocide would be successful and complete. So I want to show you some elements of the painting now and show you how they appear in earlier paintings to show how this painting, De Triumphant, was the kind of culmination of several years of grappling with his inevitable death as he came to understand it. So I sort of highlighted for you these 4 sections of the painting, and I want to show you a little bit more specific, a little bit more about them specifically. So I want to start here with this section and show you, there it is again. And you can see this is an actual photo taken of I mean, this isn't the one that Nussbaum saw and painted from, but scenes like this of bombed out buildings and these kind of scenes were, very common across Europe as it was being bombed by the Allies. So you can see the, oops, wrong button. You can see the broken wall, which is a prominent theme in his work, and you can see these severed trees with no leaves on them. And here I want to show you his perhaps the most famous painting. It's called Self-Portrait with Jewish Identity Card. And you can see here again the high wall that boxes him in. And up here you can see the contrast between this apple tree, which still has some blossoms, and this tree up here, which has been completely denuded of trees. So this is from 1943, a full year before his deportation. And he's bringing these images forward, right? He's telling these stories through images going forward in his narratives. So here's another scene I wanted to show you. Here's Nussbaum himself. Here's his self-portrait. But I want to focus actually on the man in black with the flute, or the skeleton in black with the flute, and the skeleton in this kind of burgundy robe. So here they appear in 1941, right? 3 years before Death Triumphant, in a painting called Young Couple. Here's the man dressed in black with the white flute, and here's the young lady in the burgundy top. So this is 1941. In 1943, he paints them again. Here's Nussbaum, self-portrait. And here we have the man in black. And here we have the young lady. And you can note the difference between her top now, which is looking slightly ragged, and just 2 years later where it's very ragged. And this is sort of as the occupation of Belgium and the Holocaust is going on, right? These people, right, their situation gets worse. Now they're being stalked by these skeletons. And then by the time we meet them in 1944, right, they've already been murdered. So he's carrying these characters forward through his paintings over the course of these several years between when he escaped San Cyprian and when he was ultimately deported. And we can actually tell very similar stories about Nussbaum himself, and many of these other figures do appear in earlier paintings that he made. And so here's another instance. Here's Nussbaum as an organ grinder. Do you guys know an organ grinder? You turn the handle and it plays music. So this is from 1931. This is him, and this is his father who taught him to paint, right? So this is long before the Holocaust was even on the horizon. He pictured himself as an organ grinder, and he carries this image of the organ grinder forward to 1943 when things are getting very grim. And then here you can see the organ, the organ's completely smashed up. And he's covering his ear to cover the shrieking sounds of all these dead people around him. And then one more image. This is the bottom right-hand corner of the painting. And I want to focus in on this globe and this box. So here's the refugee from 1939, right? Things are starting to get bad for the Jews of Europe. And he imagines himself looking at this map of Europe and wondering where he could possibly go. And he has his cane and bundle sack. And then this is 1942. He's escaped from San Cyprian, and he's recreated this scene. Here's the cane and the bundle sack. This is him in the painting. And here's the box, and here's a globe. And then as we see again, the box that he was sitting on and the globe are part of the detritus that he sees of Western European civilization scattered around in the chaos and destruction of World War II. So as he's going along, he's sort of creating this visual record, right? Carrying these characters forward to create a kind of sequence of paintings across time that culminate in this Death Triumphant, in which, like Katznelson, he imagines himself as the last living Jewish person on earth, surrounded by the chaos, death, and destruction, right? We have the scales of justice smashed. We have a painter's palette smashed. We have, this is an earlier painting of his, torn up, crashed cars, bombers en route, and this death orchestra of dead Jews surrounding him. So this is, again, a very different perspective than we would get from survivors, right? He thinks he's the last Jewish person on earth, and this is what it would look like to be that. So Jews also wrote letters from ghettos, from transit camps, hiding places, even inside cattle cars themselves. The train tracks on the way to Auschwitz were lined with just little scraps of paper that Jews just sort of shoved through whatever crack they could find. Time pressed in on them. They're not quite as elaborate, of course, as the paintings of Nussbaum or the poetry of Katznelson, but they're very affecting. And so I want to share one with you that I find quite moving. From an otherwise unknown woman. I apologize for the quality of the image. A woman we know nothing else about except they found the letter that she wrote. Her name is Mother Frida, and she was in Lvov, which is now modern day Western Ukraine. And even by the very difficult conditions of Jews in occupied Europe, Ukraine was famous for the harshness of its conditions. So here I include some images of women like Mother Frida who are on what were called knee marches, where Nazis would make Jewish women march through the streets on their knees, oftentimes stripped down to, as we can see, to their undergarments. And if they fell over or if they stopped, they would be beaten or shot. So here you can see some examples of these women doing these knee marches and what it would have looked like. So these are the kind of conditions that Mother Frida was operating under. And yet this is what she writes in her last letter. Forgive me for acting so idiotically without leaving any money. I am sending you something through a person. Abraham and Haiku, my dear ones, do not complain. Unfortunately, fate has willed it like this. I must go the same way as those whom I loved most. I beg of you, take care of my beloved children. Inquire about Della, whether she is still alive. Kiss her 1,000 times from me. Keep well and care for the orphans. I'm going to eternal rest. This letter contains little in the way of overt emotion. But deep feeling, of course, underlies the seeming ordinariness of her words. Forgive me for acting so idiotically without leaving any money, she writes. But of course, she was likely forcibly rounded up without having any chance to go home. And there was very little money to be had anyway, and really no opportunity to spend it. When she writes, I must go the same way as those whom I love most, we are to understand she's already lost the rest of her family, and knows that she will die too. Take care of my beloved children. But of course, the letter, she says earlier in the letter that she believes that they might already be dead. So we have a woman who has for years likely been beaten, tortured, starved, and rounded up for deportation, lost her family, doesn't know whether her children are alive or dead, knows full well that she herself is about to die, but still wants to leave this record, right? Wants to leave this trace of her existence, wants to explain what her condition in these last moments. And I think it's very telling that her concern is for her children and for that little bit of money that might actually help them. So there's real emotion underlying this letter, but it's all subtext, right? She doesn't have the time under these conditions to write a sort of long-moving, something long and moving. She doesn't have writing materials, and this has to be small enough to be smuggled out and delivered to its addressee. So these kinds of non-survivor texts, whoops. So this book, Last Letters from the Shoah, it's a very thick book, and it has hundreds of such letters, and it's one volume of many such collections of letters. So there were thousands of letters like this that were found, and of course, untold numbers that just simply blew off in the wind and no one ever found. So these kinds of non-survivor texts survive even from within the extermination camps themselves, even inside Auschwitz, by members of the Sonderkommando, the special squad. These were Jewish prisoners of Auschwitz who helped organize other Jews to get into the gas chambers. And then they cleaned and maintained these machines ongoing maintained these machines. And in exchange for this, the Sonderkommando got to live a few more months. And they also had special privileges within the camp, such as unlimited alcohol, better food, and they lived in separate and slightly more comfortable quarters. But periodically, they too would be gassed. On October 7th, 1944, a group of these Sonderkommando led an uprising with weapons and other material they had smuggled in over the course of months. They killed several Nazi guards and blew up one of the crematoria before the uprising was quelled. The participants were then tortured and executed, and their bodies hung out in the middle of the square of Auschwitz as a reminder. And if you read other Auschwitz survivor memoirs, you can read about them describing seeing these bodies. In the weeks leading up to this uprising, however, the Sonderkommando spent what they knew would be their last few weeks documenting their experiences in the camp. They engaged in what can best be termed a communal writing project, gathering at night to write concentration camp memoirs, which they buried around the camp, including in the ash pits, human ash pits behind the crematoria. They're collected together in this book, The Scrolls of Auschwitz. And here's an example of one of the manuscript pages of Leb Langfuss, one of the Sonderkommando who died in the uprising. And here is a part of the narrative where he describes his life and his experience and what he does on a day-to-day basis. And here's another page, it's a ledger, where he meticulously marks and counts the number of Jewish people sent to the crematoria on a specific day, right? That every life matters and that he wants to keep this absolutely meticulous record, not for himself, right? He knows he's going to die. So he buries this record in the ground in the hopes that someone someday might dig it up and be able to account for all these lives. They also collaborated with members of the Polish resistance to smuggle in cameras. A single camera, excuse me, which later produced 4 images, the only images of the gas chamber and crematoria taken while they were in operation. Surviving members of the Sonderkommando described how they stationed themselves all around the camp as guards, so that one Sonderkommando member, a Greek Jew named Alberto Herrera, Alex, they call him, he snuck into the gas chamber itself and took 4 photographs. And from the angle of the photographs, we can tell that he didn't sort of take it up to look through the viewfinder. He just shot from his hip. And that's why the angles are, that's why it's sort of not really, a great image. It's not framed properly. And in fact, if you understand this black frame around the image is actually the inside wall of the crematoria itself. So he's looking out through a window in the crematoria. The Sonderkommando hoped that when these images, they hoped to smuggle them out, and they hoped that when these images appeared in the world would take stock and try and do something about it. Unfortunately, the photographs were never published during the war. However, they were, of course, published afterwards, and they remain a very powerful artifact of non-survivor witness, taken less than a month before the uprising and death of almost all of the people involved in taking them. So here you can see one of the photos, which shows members of the Sonderkommando burning corpses, right? So there's the Sonderkommando members, there's corpses, and they're right disposing of the bodies. I want to show you cropped versions of the other 2 photos in a moment. And then please note photograph 4, which I'll also show you, is just trees and sky, right? So this indicates how rushed and scared and hard the conditions were for taking these photos. The photographer was unable to even sort of point the camera at a human subject. He pointed too high and just got trees and sky. So among the leaders of this uprising was Zalman Gradowski, who was 34 years old. He was from Suwałki, Poland, and he left one of the most powerful buried Sonderkommando texts. And I want to read a passage from it in which he describes an ordinary evening of cremations in 1944. And I ask that you pay a particular attention to the importance of music, of communal singing of the Jews in the crematoria in their last moments. So there's another one of the photos of women stripped naked being beaten towards the gas chamber. And I want to read to you this passage from Zalman Gradowski's diary. The last buses begin to arrive. The women's transport is almost over. A minor incident has taken place. She won't let herself be undressed, a well-developed young woman from Slovakia. She screams to enter the bunker with the deadly gas. She refuses to enter the bunker with the deadly gas. She shouts, she screams, she calls the other women to battle. Shoot me, she cries out to them. And they, the bandits, willingly oblige. They do her that favor. They took her back up to the moonlit earth, and 2 men with yellow armbands twisted her arms behind her back. And the fresh, vibrant young girl fought hard with convulsive movements of all her limbs. In the still of night, a brief crack rang out, and a wild beast with a highly cultured bullet quickly robbed her of her life. A young tree was felled. A dull thud was heard, and her heavy body hit the cold earth. A stream of blood spread over the ground, and her eyes looked fixedly toward the moon, who continued on her course. There was a life, and is no more. A few minutes ago, she strained, shouted, cried out, and called for struggle and resistance. And now she lies stretched out, arms spread outward, as if she would embrace the entire world. Down below in the huge bunker, they are still singing songs. Their voices shout down all anxiety, drown out every fear that tries to take possession of their heart and soul. Now they sing the partisan song, which like a spear pierces deep into their hearts. For the partisans are the heroic freedom fighters from whose ranks many martyrs fall each day. In the future, they will be the heavy hand of punishment when the defeated armies flee in terror to hide in fields and woods, somewhere in a pit, in valleys, amid thick trees and bushes. And they will come from their hiding places and pay them back for everything. They will take revenge for the suffering and hardships that they themselves endured because of them. With bloody cruelty, they will take revenge for the innocents, fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers who are being murdered here. For these thousands of lives wiped out here today. And then when the storm is over, they will come from everywhere, will come to the surface from all the earthen graves to form great battalions of revenge takers. And they will be witnesses before the world of the horrific, sadistic, barbaric deeds that they inflicted on millions of people all over the world. They will lead the victorious armies to the fields and woods and show them the places where the hundreds of thousands of innocent victims lie, those who are buried alive in deep graves or those who burned alive in fire. And may they for all take revenge. Barely has the last woman entered the bunker when the door slams shut and is hermetically locked and bolted so that no air can enter. The victims stand as if stuffed into a cask, already suffocating from heat and thirst. They know that very soon, one more minute, one more instant, and the end will come. And yet, they go on singing. Now they want to forget it all. On the waves of music, they want to hold themselves afloat. On those sounds and through those sounds, through those high, sweet notes, they want to swim the short distance from life to death. And they, the high-ranking officers, still stand and wait until they have breathed their last breath. One more act, the last, the noblest, they still have left to see, when the thousands of victims will sway like grasses in a storm, and when the very last trace of life is gone, then they will see the most beautiful scene of all, when the 2,500 victims will fall like chopped down trees, each interwoven with the others. And that will be the last act of their lives, of their world. So here, Gradowski lets us imagine what it was like inside the gas chamber, with the sounds of thousands of dying Czech Jews singing the partisan song. Again, this is not literally coming back to life to tell us about their death, but this is showing us these deaths as close as one can possibly get. The partisan song in Yiddish, Sag nit kein Mol, were lyrics written by Hirsch Glick, who was a member of the Vilna Ghetto resistance. And he was captured and executed by the Nazis in 1944 when he was 22 years old. The song is set to a pre-Soviet Russian song called the Cossacks March. And now I would like to ask my friend, Dr. Mara Campbell, instructor of musical theater voice here at NDSU, to sing it for us.
Wetter beugt unser Trott, wir seinen do. Von grünen Palmen an bis weißen an von Schnee, wir kommen an mir unser Pein mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, so spritzt von unser Blut, sprotzen Wetter unser Gwura, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, so spritzt von unser Blut, sprotza Wetter unser Gwura, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgens unbegilden uns dem Heind, und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur Räupersamen weckt die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Nur Räupersamen weckt die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol so geht das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Das Lied geschrieben mit Blut und nicht mit Blei, siehst nicht kein Mädel von Neufeugal der frei. Das hat auf Volk zwischen Fallen dick gewähnt, das Lied steht gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Das rote Volk zwischen fallen dicken Wand. Das steht gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Da sag nicht keinmal, dass du gehst im letzten Weg. Von Himmeln bleiene, versterne bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser Haus gebänkte Schor. Es wird abheugt an unser Brot mir seinen Tod. Kommen wird noch unser Haus gebänkte Schor. Es wird abheugt an unser Brot mir seinen Tod.
Though the peoples, communities, languages, and cultures of Eastern European Jewry were largely destroyed, some insisted before their deaths on transmitting their lives to the future. Their spectral last words, echoing down to us across the decades, stand as a stark reminder both of the anti-Semitism they faced and their heroic efforts in resistance through writing, fighting, photography, painting, music, whatever form of art or weapon they had at their disposal, to save what they loved, or barring that, at least prevent it from being forgotten. Gradowski writes in his manuscript, and here you can see he and his wife. And in his manuscript, he insists that this photo be used as on it. And here you can see the bottle that he buried it in. He insists in his manuscript, it may be that the lines that I am now writing, will be the sole witness to what was my life. But I shall be happy if only my writings should reach you, citizen of the free world. Perhaps a spark of my inner fire will ignite within you, and even should you sense only part of what we lived for, you will be complete. You will be compelled to avenge us, avenge our deaths. Dear discoverer of these writings, I have a request for you. This is the real reason why I write. That my doomed life may attain some meaning, that my hellish days and hopeless tomorrows may find a purpose in the future. So when I think about when I talk about finding the true witness as a way of rethinking Holocaust education, I by no means mean to intend to suggest that we should not read Anne Frank's diary, or we should not read Elie Wiesel or Primo Levi, but I do think that these texts, paintings, music, and other art by Jewish non-survivors have a vital role to play, giving us a glimpse not of what it was like to survive the Holocaust, but to die in it. And I really, truly want to thank NDSU, my colleagues in English, who I see several of them here, for giving me the opportunity over the past several years to work on this project and to give me the opportunity to share it with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goldwyn. This is an opportunity for folks to ask questions. Happy to walk the microphone around the room and the keyboard back. And we also have the ability to take questions through Zoom for those who are joining us remotely.
Thank you very much for this presentation. With so many folks who intended to write knowing that they were not going to make it, how were their writings found, and were people intentionally like going to exhume those spots to find the journals that were there? Like, how did they know to look, or was it accidentally found?
Yeah, so these texts survive, as I kind of tried to indicate, in a lot of different ways. Many of the letters reached their recipients, and then after the war, the recipients went to find their loved ones, found that they were gone, and donated them to museums or things like that. It was very, very common to bury these texts. So I showed you the image of the Sonderkommando buried manuscripts. Gradowski says elsewhere, dig everywhere. You'll find manuscripts all over. I think there's 5 that survived, and they were found by the Polish Archaeological Service when they made purposeful excavations of this place. But many were found in happenstance ways. When they were rebuilding Vilna, they knocked down a bunch of buildings and found some inside walls. There was a famous archive called the Oyneg Shabbos Archive, or the Ringelbaum Archive. where Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, just said, "We're all going to die. We need to preserve everything we can possibly find," and they buried things all over the ghetto. And the survivors went back and said, "I think there was one under here. I think there was one under there," and they were able to find several of the caches. Felix Nussbaum's survived. His friend stored them in his basement. He would paint them in hiding, and his friend would store them in his basement. And Nussbaum's alleged last words before he was deported were, "Bring these back up to the surface, so to show the world." So they survived in a lot of happenstance sort of ways, purposeful ways. But we also have to recall, of course, that the overwhelming majority didn't survive at all. So these are sort of rare documents for us.
Can you talk a little bit about your research process of how you pulled them together, how you identified the manuscripts and the artworks to include in your book?
Yeah. So again, this project kind of began when I started thinking about Holocaust education and what it is that we know and we don't know, and how is this sort of being passed on. And I really did draw from, I was teaching Primo Levi, actually, If This Is a Man. And he sort of says, as I said, we're not the true witnesses. And I thought to myself, this can't possibly be the most famous witness saying we're not the true witnesses because we survived. And then I started sort of going into the archives. I mean, there's vast online archives now. And what I sort of noticed was many scholars have made this distinction between literature of the Holocaust or literature during the Holocaust and literature after the Holocaust. But it was a little bit fragmentary in the sense that no one had sort of brought together these diverse kinds of works, right? No one had sort of said, well, this kind of highly ornate rhetorical Yiddish poetry can actually be read in conjunction with this kind of scratched out letter that we found on the side of the railroad track. But they have something really compelling when you put them together, which is these sort of last words of these people who knew they would die and wanted to convey something to the future. So that was the sort of organizing principle in my mind, these two ideas, right? That they did not survive is one thing, and that they knew they wouldn't. And I think that knowledge of impending death really is the sort of intellectual key for unlocking my research to say, like, what is it that they wanted to tell us? And I think that message is very profound right now. When I was growing up, we had Holocaust survivors in our community. They would come to our synagogues. They would be our grandparents' friends. They were, in many cases, our grandparents. But nowadays, it's very rare that the youngest Holocaust survivors are now well in their 80s, and none of them experienced concentration camp life. So a few years ago, I went to visit a child survivor from Greece named Yosif Ventouras, who's a wonderful poet now. And I visited him in Greece, and he was 7 years old from Crete, when the Jews of Crete were liquidated, and he was hidden by his nurse, by the nanny. And he only found out that he was Jewish 4 or 5 years later. And so I thought to myself, we all of us in this room, myself, are on this generational cusp where we ourselves are transitioning from a world of Holocaust survivors into a world of non-Holocaust survivors. And those survivors have carried a heavy burden to make sure that the world knows that experience that they embody. So the question that I sort of think is a central question of Holocaust studies is, how will this discipline last? How do we convey this knowledge about the Holocaust when the embodied survivor is no longer there? And I thought to myself, well, we kind of maybe have a clue here, because these people also felt they were in a similar situation. How can we carry the message of the Holocaust forward when there are no survivors? Because they believed there would be no survivors. So those were sort of the two, that was sort of the second underpinning of this research, was like, how are we thinking about the Holocaust going forward when we rely so much on the survivor to embody that experience? We have a model for how to convey information about the Holocaust in the absence of a survivor from the Holocaust itself. So that's sort of how I kind of put the pieces together for this project.
At the beginning, you presented some statistics by state on knowledge of the details of the Holocaust and the scale. I'm just curious, how does our country and those statistics compare with the rest of the world?
Yeah, I don't have data on the rest of the world off the top of my head. I know that Holocaust education, Holocaust denial, sort of writ large, is globally on the rise in every single country all across the world. And I think that, again, has to do with the lack of embodied survivors and just the general time period. But many states, many countries now are also grappling with similar questions that we have. And especially in Eastern Europe, it's now oftentimes intertwined with their own contemporary politics. There's a genre of what are called memory laws, what you can and cannot teach, what you can and cannot say. So in Poland today, you can teach that the Holocaust happened, but you cannot teach that there was Polish complicity in it. It was something that the Germans did. The sort of the common line you hear in Austria is that they were Hitler's first victims, right? Because they were the first country that Germany conquered. So I think I don't have the specific data on other countries, but this is not something that the U.S. alone is sort of grappling with, how to sort of continue with this educational process. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. In 2018, my family and I got a chance to visit Germany, and I'm pretty positive we visited Auschwitz. And so the tour guide at the time stated that, if I'm remembering correctly, that the Holocaust, it was mandatory, that parts of it be taught. And so with this slide, I think this one or the one before, but you were talking about where the state of North Dakota, that I think the bill didn't pass in 2025.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so my question is, I don't recall it, but my question is, was a reason given why the bill didn't pass? And then part two of that is, what do you think is the true reason why the bill didn't pass?
Truth be told, I don't know why, and I was actually quite shocked because, as you can see, the margin in the House is overwhelming, 85-7. The margin in the Senate, it was much smaller, only 3 votes, 22-25, I believe. I don't actually know. I think that in general, there's a skepticism by the state legislature to impose curricula on K-12 schools. So I think that would probably, again, I don't actually know, but I would guess that the reason would be a sort of general local control over school curriculum, which is, I think, a pretty widely, that's a kind of general consensus across states, right? That local communities should have curricular control rather than mandates by the state. So that would be my guess, but I don't actually know. Call your congressperson.
So, how do you see this information or your book fitting into as you pointed out, this sort of denial of the Holocaust? And do you think that if we, for example, I'm much younger than a good chunk of this room. I'm used to that. I'm kind of an odd one out. But I'm Generation Z. And so do you think if I had grown up with learning more about the true witness as opposed to just Anne Frank, because we didn't read the night in school, that people of my generation and younger would have a different perspective? And do you think that this would impact that rise of denial, and would it change that course?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, what education can and can't do, and what are the limits of education, especially in the media ecosystem that we live in. As I was thinking more and more about this project, I think the overwhelming majority of people who know about the Holocaust actually get their information from popular film, right? I think that's the number one way, right? So, like, even thinking about academic study in K through 12, I think that that's not the main way people even find out, learn about it nowadays anyway. I think mostly it's through Schindler's List, The Pianist, all these kind of popular Hollywood blockbuster films that we see about the Holocaust. And I think it's a question also of, I mean, I read you one passage from Grodowski. It's not the easiest passage to sit and listen to, right? And so I think there's also a way in which, and that was actually one of the easier passages, so to speak, right? So I think that there's a fine line that we can walk as educators to say, like, here's something you should read. The Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel, it doesn't allow children under 13 entry. It's too, right? I mean, it's too visceral. So I think one of the reasons that we maybe avoid some of these texts because they're, how much do we want to, it's important that they know things about the Holocaust, but on the other hand, do we want to, at what age and what age level and how much should we impose that knowledge upon them? And I think those are really, really difficult questions to answer. I do think that, I mean, this was the kind of the thesis of the paper, right? That I do think that if students encountered fewer survivor literature and more literature like this, then they might come away with the idea like, oh, actually, the main thing was that they died, not that they survived. And I think, that for me, I would take as a big step forward in Holocaust education now, as we have it today. But I think the ethics of teaching it are a very, especially in mandatory K through 12, right? Like, it's hard to encounter some of this stuff, and what age is appropriate, and that's not always the same for every child and every student in every way. So, difficult questions.
I believe we have time for one more question. Julie, do we have any coming in through Zoom?
You mentioned films. So what do you make of a film that won Oscars, like La Vita è Bella?
Yeah, this is Bruce Mayloff, not only our neighbor, but also a previous Faculty Lectureship Award winner. So it's wonderful to see you. Yes, I think that, a lot of these films, they do foreground survivors, right? That particular film, La Vita è Bella, it's another film that's actually quite ethically complicated. It's set in Auschwitz, but it's fiction, right? So the question of fictionality and historicity, I think, also is very fraught. Like, are we allowed to make up stories about the Holocaust, even if they teach us something more truthful than something that's true? And although the sort of protagonist does die in that, right, his son lives. So it also sort of ends with a kind of uplift at the end, because we see the father making all these sorts of sacrifices to spare his son full knowledge of what's happening. And as I recall, he meets his mother in the end, right? His mom, he bumps into his mother, and that's again like a very different story than Yitzhak Katz-Nelson, whose entire family was wiped out, or the pun, so to speak, on Zero Generation, right? I call them that because they're different from first generation writers who are survivors. So they're zero because they come before them, but also they had no Zero Generation. They produced no offspring. This generation was wiped out, and so I think we sort of oscillate between this sort of Hollywood ending of, oh, they survived and there's some lesson there and there's some uplift and there's some hope, with the reality that that's a anomalous case, right? That fictional narrative is anomalous. The more common narrative is the story of Yitzhak Katz-Nelson, whose family was entirely wiped out, or Felix Nussbaum, whom he and Falca never had the chance to have children. So I think that narrative, is it perhaps better than no one ever seeing the inside of Auschwitz, so to speak? I think possibly, but it's still doing something that I think is also ethically troubling nonetheless.
Thank you all for your excellent questions. I will now invite Provost Vale up to conclude our event and to congratulate Dr. Goldwyn.
Thank you, Carrie Ann, and thank you, Adam, for an incredibly thought-provoking and moving presentation that bridged across history and literature and music and art, and just our understanding of how these prosthetic memories get carried forward into our collective memory and how we really understand society. So just an incredible lecture. So proud to have you here at NDSU, and I'm delighted to present you. Commemoration of your lectureship here, the 65th lectureship here at NDSU. So going back to 1960 of passing down this tradition of recognizing an incredible scholar in this way. So thank you and congratulations. And please join us for a conversation and continued congratulations out in for the reception for cake. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.